Lest we forget, Flight Sergeant George Henry Steinhauer. About George. So, George's early life, he was born November 13th, 1919, in Morse, Saskatchewan. He attended Morse School and lived south of Morse on a homestead, as you can see here on this map. He had 3 siblings, Martha, Robert, and Richard, and his parents were John and Elizabeth Wunsch Steinhauer. They were born in Russia and immigrated to Canada in 1905. George enjoyed hockey, painting, and photography in his spare time, but he was single at enlistment and never did marry. When he enlisted, he applied for enlistment twice. So he applied in May 1939, but due to inexperience, he was put on a waiting list. He then took a youth training for airplane mechanics in the summer of 1940, which then helped him outperform the competition, and so he reapplied in September 1940 and was accepted into the Royal Canadian Air Force. George was about 6 feet tall and 193 pounds at the time of enlistment. He had green eyes, black hair, and a scar on his left knee. The only surgery he had performed was he had his tonsils and adenoids removed when he was 16. He also had a systolic heart murmur and septal deviation, both of which were actually passed down into his descendants. He also had excellent vision, which was very important when being in the Air Force. So in George's early service, he began his service in Brandon, Manitoba, September 1940. He learned to fly the Tiger Moth aircraft in Lethbridge and received training on Avro Anson's in Calgary. He also received his pilot wings and was promoted to flight sergeant while in Calgary. He was then shipped to Nova Scotia in preparation to join the Europe Air Forces. Once he arrived at Europe, he was processed at 3 PRC in Uxbridge in Britain on May 31st, 1941. After he was processed, he was posted to 19 Operational Training Unit for training to fly as a bomber crew over enemy territory. Once he had finished his training as part of a bomber crew, he was posted to 51 Squadron on August 12, 1941. With the 51st Squadron, he performed multiple flights, but specific details of what he did and his contributions were not readily available. On October 24th, he was posted to the 35th Squadron. The home base of the 35th Squadron was in Linton-on-Ouse, North Yorkshire, which you can see on this map. It is the top location marker. He had to attend a conversion course to learn how to fly Halifax 2 planes, and his first flight with the 35th Squadron was on January 6, 1941 to bomb Port Militaire at Brest, which you can see the flight pattern and where Brest is on this map. His third flight with the 35th Squadron, they were tasked to bomb Wilhelmshaven from 19,000 feet above. After releasing the bombs, the hydraulics on the plane failed, so the rear gunner, Sergeant Cohen, experienced an issue with his oxygen due to the very, very cold temperature, 19,000 feet in the air, and he actually passed out. So the flight attendant, Sergeant Mitchell, was dispatched to give first aid, but forgot his own oxygen and also passed out. Flight Sergeant Steinhauer was forced to put the plane into a dive down to 12,000 feet to prevent brain damage or death of his crewmates, which there's a diagram here to show a visual of how far down that is compared to ground level at 0. Flight Sergeant Steinhauer's final mission was on March 30th, 1941. His crew was sent to attack the German battleship Tirpitz in Fjetenfjord, Norway. It is suspected, but not confirmed, that the plane was shot down by German AA frontline boat, Sash. There are records from that boat and their mission records that they had shot down a plane that matched the descriptions, but it was never confirmed that that was the plane shot down. The aircraft crashed on the Remingsgerdret Island between the islands of Smola and Edoya. Only 4 bodies were ever recovered, those of Flight Sergeant Steinhauer, Pilot Officer Brown, Sergeant Cohen, and Sergeant Meade. The crew in the aircraft for this mission was Flight Sergeant Steinhauer acting as pilot, Pilot Officer Brown acting as second pilot, Flight Sergeant Goodrum acting as navigator, Sergeant Dunlap acting as flight engineer, and Sergeant Meade, Sergeant Campbell, and Sergeant Cohen all acting as gunners. I have provided a map here to show the flight pattern towards the crash site of the aircraft, as well as their intended goal, which is the circle with the star in it here. George Henry Steinhauer was buried at the Trondheim Stavne Cemetery on April 8, 1942, in Plot K3. He was 22 years old at the time of death. Flight Sergeant Steinhauer is commemorated in the Bomber Command Memorial Wall in Mountain, Alberta, Canada. There was also a lake named after him. Steinhauer Lake is located near Black Lake, Saskatchewan, as you can see here on this map. It was a Saskatchewan government initiative that was created to rename geographical features after Canadian soldiers who had lost their lives fighting for our country. Flight Sergeant Steinhauer received 4 awards for his time serving with the Royal Canadian Air Force. He received the 1939 to 1945 Star, awarded for 2 months active aircrew service. He also received the Aircrew Europe Star, awarded for operational flying of 2 months from the UK over Europe, as well as the War Medal 1939 to 1945, awarded for working 28 days as a full-time personnel of the Armed Forces between September 2, 1939 and September 2, 1945. Lastly, he received the Canadian Volunteer Service Medal with clasps, awarded for voluntarily serving on the RCF on active service between September 3, 1939 and March 1, 1947. The clasps he received were the Silver Bar and the Bomber Command Bar, awarded for serving 60 days service outside Canada and a minimum of 1 day with the Bomber Command, respectively. His memory lives on in the Coates and Steinhauer families descended from his father's siblings, lest we forget the sacrifices and service given to us by George Henry Steinhauer.